In the year 1066, the King of England died with no apparent heir. Like a drop of blood in the water, this now drew in the sharks. Among the fiercest of these would be King Harald Hardrada of Norway. A veteran of countless campaigns, with the full might of the North at his back, none could be counted his equal. The throne of England would be his. You can learn more about the lives of the Vikings through our sponsor Magellan TV. I highly recommend their series Warrior's Way, which does an excellent job humanizing the soldiers of various civilizations, including the Mongols, Scots, Celts, Romans, and more. The episode, Sigurd Bjornsson, Viking Exile, in particular, gives you a great window into the daily life of medieval Scandinavia, with excellent historical reenactments to boot. Documentary videos like this are added weekly to Magellan TV, which already has a collection of over 3,000 videos to choose from among the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. You can watch Sigurd Bjornsson, Viking Exile, or any documentary that catches your interest by clicking the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/invicta to get a 1-month free trial. Enjoy! For centuries, England had seen its lands claimed by various powers from across the Isles and beyond. Theoretically, the crown was up for grabs by whoever had the largest army. Yet any meaningful level of control was typically backed up by some claim to legitimacy. For the purposes of our story, this would have to do with the events of the early 11th century when Cnut the Great had brought the crowns of Denmark, Norway, and England together, forming the North Sea Empire. His right to rule was acknowledged far and wide, and even got him invited to Rome, where he engaged with the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, and numerous other important figures of the era. This was how conquerors transformed into rulers. Thus, when Cnut died unexpectedly at the age of 45, many attempted to find power through association with his established credibility. The most obvious inheritor was his son Harthknut, yet while he had first dibs on the crown, others quickly moved in to grab a hold of it using their military might. Harthknut ended up jockeying for power with Magnus in Norway, with the two formally agreeing that if either of them died, the other would inherit his counterpart's lands. When Harthknut succumbed first, this IOU passed to Magnus, but could never be claimed given the swirling geopolitics of the period. Thus, this claim was eventually picked up by his uncle, Harald Hardrada, who had returned to strong-arm his own way onto the Norwegian throne. For years, he too would be preoccupied by clashes with his Scandinavian neighbors. However, when the King of England, Edward the Confessor, died on January 5th in 1066, Harald Hardrada would finally decide to cash in on his golden ticket. But this was no free ride, and the claim would have to be redeemed by force of arms. Across the waves, there were many others who had similar ambitions. The situation was made worse by the fact that the late King Edward had handled succession plans with great indecision and even appears to have made promises to different parties over the years. These all came calling in 1066. Currently, it was Harold Godwinson who held the crown of England, having been chosen by the country's leaders. This was due to his blood ties to both Cnut the Great and the late king, but more importantly, due to House Godwin's regional prominence and proximity to power. For similar reasons, his brother Tostig also aspired to the throne, but had been exiled and was now residing in Scotland after several failed attempts to grab control. He is actually reported to have been the one who convinced Harald Hardrada to invade, undoubtedly hoping that he might ride back into power on his coattails. But Tostig was quite the schemer, and also attempted to place bets on another claimant to the throne, William of Normandy. His claim was not as clear as the others, and hinged on vague reports that at one point the late King Edward had promised him rulership, and that the current King Harold had years before promised to uphold William's supposed right to ascend. Yet ultimately, so long as a token reason could be offered, it really came down to his military might. To that end, he excelled. William assembled around 10,000 men and several hundred ships for an invasion. Harold Godwinson recognized this as the main threat, and mobilized primarily to counteract this claimant. Luckily for the other contenders, a prolonged period of ill weather kept the two staring across the channel at one another for months. This allowed Harald Hardrada to make his move first. Starting in March and lasting around 6 months, the Norwegian king mustered a grand invasion force. Numbering some 10,000 men aboard almost 300 longships, it was an impressive host, roughly twice the size of the great heathen army which had first carved out the Danelaw in England 2 centuries earlier. Finally, after all preparations had been made, they set off in September. Behind would be left his son Magnus, who acted as temporary king, along with his Norwegian wife Tora. With him, though, came his Kievan Rus wife Elisaveta, along with his remaining son Olaf and 2 daughters. The fleet first stopped in the islands of Shetland and Orkney. These were held by Norwegian forces, who now resupplied the fleet and committed additional men to the invasion. Next, they sailed down the coast of Scotland, picking up 2,000 Scottish troops offered by King Malcolm III. After this, they rendezvoused with Tostig and his 12 ships at the mouth of the River Tyne. Finally, this combined invasion force sailed to the English lands of Northumbria to begin their invasion proper. Sailing up the River Tees, the army made landfall. The men splashed eagerly ashore, shaking off their sea legs and dreaming eagerly of the plunder that awaited them. After Harold was sure no opposition lurked nearby, the troops were unleashed upon the land, raiding many coastal settlements. Most surrendered at first sight. However, when the town of Scarborough refused to back down, Harold had it burned as an example to others. The rest quickly bent the knee. But the army had little time to spare in this region, and after just 2 weeks of predation, set off to find new prey. They next sailed up the Humber estuary. On the 20th of September, they landed at the town of Rickhall, just 15 miles from York. Knowing that this was to be a significant staging point for the campaign, they set up camp and began to prepare for real combat. This proved a wise decision, as news of their early raiding to the north had spread quickly. In response, the Earls of Northumbria and Mercia had rallied their forces and were ready to fight. The two would meet near the village of Fulford, just outside of York. The English earls had a force of around 5,000 men, which was far smaller than that of the invaders. They therefore chose to secure a strip of land anchored between the River Ouse and a region of marshland with a ditch laid before it. Seeing this, Harold moved his men up to engage them. However, the vastness of his force and the nature of the region's topology meant that they had to filter in by various routes and would take hours to fully deploy. For now, the king's banner was planted on the left, and around it were marshaled the best of their troops. The greener warbands, meanwhile, were deployed along the right. Slowly, more men continued to trickle in. Sensing that the balance of power was slowly shifting away from them, the English earls decided to launch their attack. Our sources claim that they did so when the invaders numbered just 6,000, giving both sides a rough parity in troop count. The assault came heaviest along the ditch. Here it seems that the prepared English ranks were able to easily force back the Scandinavian forces who were not yet fully deployed. Earl Morcar pressed the advantage, hoping to completely collapse this wing. However, they soon encountered stiffer resistance as seasoned lieutenants shored up the shield wall. Meanwhile, on the left, Harold continued to pool his men until he had a clear superiority in both numbers and skill. Now, he called for his banner, Land Ravager, to be brought forth and sent out to lead the assault. The charge was devastating. Earl Edwin put up a brave defense, but his men were crumbling under the inexorable pressure. As the fighting dragged on, the English army found itself slowly being ground down, isolated, and surrounded. Eventually, the Anglo-Saxons by the river began to withdraw, hoping to make a better stand within the walls of York itself. Their brethren, caught in the center and by the marshes, found it far more difficult to extricate themselves. This was made worse by the arrival of fresh waves of Norwegian troops who slipped through the gaps in the battle line to envelop the position. I'll now quote the sagas. The gallant Harold drove along, flying but fighting the whole throng. At last, confused they could not fight, and the whole body took to flight. Up from the river's silent stream, at once rose desperate splash and scream. But they who stood like men this fray, round Morcar's body lay. The casualties were heavy for both sides. Ultimately, however, it was the outnumbered and defeated English who suffered the worst of the massacre towards the end of the day. So thick were the Anglo-Saxon dead that it was said a Norseman could walk dry-footed across the whole marsh. In the aftermath, the people of the surrounding countryside either fled or flocked to supplicate themselves before a victorious Harold. York itself stood resolute for the time being. The invaders therefore advanced on the target and demanded its surrender. Harold's ally Tostig had connections in the city and used these to call a meeting of the people. Here, the Yorkmen apparently agreed to bend the knee and would send hostages to secure the deal. Arrangements were then made for a follow-up assembly where Harold would name officers to rule the town, set out new laws, and bestow fiefs to his men. Satisfied, he pulled the Norse army back to the nearby fleet at anchor to celebrate and recover. However, unbeknownst to the invaders, time was not on their side. Harold Godwinson had been kept well appraised of these events to the north, and made the critical decision to confront the Norwegians before the Normans. It was an incredibly bold move that saw him force march his troops the 190 miles from London to York at a breakneck speed of roughly 40 miles a day. In just 4 days, they had arrived. Exhausted but intact, they entered York by night and resecured the city. The next morning, just a day after York had agreed to terms of new management, Harald Hardrada set off to claim what was his at the agreed-upon meeting point of Stamford Bridge. Completely unaware of the sudden reversal in fortunes, he ordered 1/3 of the army to remain with the ships. Among them were his family and various important lords. Likely they were already making a thorough accounting of the battle spoils and projecting what their profits would be like in the days ahead. Meanwhile, the troops on land were also in good spirits. It was an uncommonly fine day, with a hot sun gracing the lands. Because of this, most of the Norsemen were said to have left their armor behind. Shields, helms, sword spears, and bows would be more than enough to deal with any resistance the townfolk might give them. However, as Harold approached the heights around Stamford Bridge, there was spotted a cloud of dust in the distance and the gleaming of armor. At first, it was thought that this might be nearby lords come to bend the knee. Alas, it was soon understood that their numbers were great and their disposition hostile. Somehow, some way, the King of England was here. This caused a panic among the lesser captains who advised Harold to retire. However, the harsh ruler had faced this sort of situation before and was not so easily scared off. Recall that at the naval battle of Nisa, he had chosen to stand and fight despite being outnumbered 2-1. In that case, his trust in the men was rewarded with a great victory. So it would be again. Harald Hardrada now ordered that Land Ravager be planted. They would hold the English here, while riders were sent back to call upon the rest of the army with all haste. Their arrival would act as a convenient flanking force that could sandwich the foe if he remained tied down long enough against Harold's position. Thus, the Norwegian king prepared to hunker down for this eventuality. According to later sources, the English were prevented from attacking immediately by a brave Norseman who stood upon the bridge. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle claims that he was a huge berserker clutching a massive double-bladed great axe. Swinging it madly at all who approached, he single-handedly held the entire army at the narrow crossing, slaying up to 40 Englishmen in his furious last stand. However, the brave berserker was finally defeated when an Anglo-Saxon soldier floated under the bridge in a half-barrel and thrust his long spear through the lathes in the bridge, mortally wounding him. While this story is most likely a fabrication, it seems that Harold was nonetheless able to buy himself enough time to adequately deploy his forces. Knowing the enemy's command of horses, he had the army form a wide ring. Warbands stood shield to shield across the front, with the king's retinue and many elite troops being positioned in the center to react to the flow of battle. Throughout their midst were bowmen, ready to shower the enemy with arrows. With the eye of a seasoned commander, Harald Hardrada rode around the formation to survey the line and call out proper battle orders. Shields locked, spears planted, pikes at breast level. He was dressed regally in a blue tunic with a shining helm and his famed mail shirt Emma, which was said to be impenetrable by mortal weapons. Apparently, he made such a sight that the enemy remarked at his formidable disposition, yet they remained committed to the attack. Finally, the great English host made its advance. Estimates vary, but tend to place their number at around 10,000 foot and 2,000 horse compared to Harold's 6,000 warriors on the field. First came the skirmishers and cavalry. Arrows began to rain upon the Norse lines while riders sallied out to probe the shield wall. Neither made a dent. Such was Harald Hardrada's confidence that he even began to sing verses. In battle storm we seek no lee, with skulking head and bending knee. Behind the hollow shield, with eyes at hand we fend the head. Courage and skill stand in the stead of panzer, helm, and shield in Hild's bloody field. Eventually, though, his men grew overconfident. In some sections of the shield wall, impetuous Norsemen broke ranks to overpursue the cavalry that had been harassing them for the better part of an hour. This was the moment that the English had been waiting for. Harold Godwinson now had his troops swarm in to cut off these men and exploit the gap which had formed. But Harald Hardrada had also anticipated such a moment and now committed himself and the elite reserves to the breach. All of a sudden, a fierce melee broke out. The Norwegian king placed himself in the thick of the fighting, felling all in his path. The sagas describe his furor as follows, quote, "Where battle storm was ringing, where arrow cloud was singing, Harald stood there, of armor bare, his deadly sword still swinging. The foeman feel its bite, his Norsemen rushed to fight. Danger to share with Harald there, where steel on steel was ringing." This was the confidence of a grizzled veteran who had fought more battles across more lands against more foes than any other man that day. To all, he seemed invincible. Yet fate makes fools of us all. At some point, an English bowman notched and loosed an arrow at the precise moment, at the precise speed and angle, to be carried upon the wind straight for the king. As if guided by the same gods who saw a shaft pierce the heel of Achilles, it found its bite directly in Harold's throat. And like that, with a convulsive spurt of blood, he collapsed. The Viking legend was dead. Some rushed to recover his body, but were cut down as well. The remainder of his retinue pulled back to the defensive shield wall with the king's banner. The death of such a man now brought a moment of stunned silence to the battlefield. Both sides separated and reformed ranks. Harold Godwinson sent riders out seeking to parley with his brother Tostig. Should the Norsemen agree to take the body of their king and leave this land, all would be given fair quarter and allowed to retire peacefully. Yet when this was rejected, war cries were raised and battle renewed. Now the fighting was at its fiercest. Both sides committed their all, sensing that this last action would decide the fate of battle. Luckily for the outnumbered Norwegians, it is at this moment that Eystein Ore arrived with the roughly 2,000 to 3,000 reinforcements. Though they were exhausted from the run from the ships, their numbers still counted for much. As Harald had predicted, their late arrival allowed them to catch the English in the flank. With Eystein wielding Land Ravager, they plunged deep into the enemy ranks. Many Englishmen fell, and they were nearly driven to flight. However, fatigue finally put an end to the assault, and the tide slowly turned back in favor of Harold Godwinson. Norsemen, barely able to lift their shields, fell in droves. Only nightfall made safe their desperate flight. As the survivors made it back to the fleet, these hurriedly clambered aboard and took off. It was said that of the 300 ships that had sailed to England, only 30 would return. Tradition holds that the Battle of Stamford Bridge would be the last great battle of the Viking Age. For England, it was certainly a changing of the tides. Though the Norsemen were expelled, the effort proved so costly that they would be bested soon after by William's forces at the Battle of Hastings. Thus did the rule of England now fatefully pass to the Normans. Norway, meanwhile, would be ruled jointly by Harold's sons Olaf and Magnus. They are reported to have made fine kings who held their own against Svein of Denmark and presided over a rare time of extended peace. 1 year after the fall of their father, they recovered his body and had it buried with great honors in Nidaros. Many came to honor his grave. Though most had felt his wrath at one point or another, it was acknowledged by all that he was harsh but fair in justice, of distinguished mind and body, and above all other men, bold, brave, and lucky. His legend would echo down the halls of Scandinavia for generations unto this very day. It's been an honestly incredible experience for me to join in this long and hallowed tradition. I hope you've enjoyed the roller coaster of a tale, and I can't thank you all enough for making such efforts possible through your support. What great sagas should we sing of next? A huge shout out to the patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related videos. See you in the next one.